Hello, this is Cynthia Sue Larson with RealityShifters.com talking with you today about the question, is reality a soul trap or is it a school? And this question came to me from someone who wrote an email based on having seen a video that was created by Christopher Anatra and Sean Bond, and they interviewed Howdie Mickoski, asking him questions about his ideas. And the email I got said, not sure if you know Howdie Mickoski or if you saw the interview, but my question is basically, what's your thought on this whole idea that we, the people, are being farmed for energy in this reality? Basically, Plato's cave, with a layer of energy farming from the Arcons that were being held prisoners in this reality. And then the email continued, I hold you and your thoughts in high regard, and I'm very curious as to what your take is on this. Would absolutely love it if you made a video about it, and if not, just for you to give me your thoughts here. I have a feeling that this idea of Howdie Mickoski can be a trap of its own. It certainly isn't asking how good can it get, more like the opposite. And so I think this is such a terrific and timely question, especially this whole matter of Plato's cave. It's a lot of people refer to that when talking about consciousness. If you're not familiar with it, it basically goes something like this. Plato, the Greek philosopher, proposed this idea that reality is similar or analogous to prisoners deep underground in a subterranean cave, watching a wall. Now the prisoners are chained and they're watching these shapes and images moving on the cave wall, which are actually, it's like a shadow play. And so the light in the cave is being cast by a candle or a fire or something like that. And then there are these shapes that are moving that create images that the prisoners are observing. And so that's the take on this soul trap concept in a way. The idea that prisoners are, that reality is that people are forced to watch something unfolding, that they're chained, you know, that there's that whole concept of being in a trap of sorts. And so that there are many aspects, of course, to this allegory of the cave. But when you look at that particular aspect that Plato had envisioned, that people can't leave the cave. They can't just easily get up, go outside the cave and see for themselves that there's a whole world out there of animals and plants and the sun and so forth. But if you're trapped, then that's what reality can seem like. Now, sticking with that allegory of the cave, Howdie Mickoski's idea that we are living in a soul trap is something that appears to be a valuable topic of discussion, since so many different people have also looked at this, not just Plato and the cave, but also David Icke describes the prison planet idea. Robert Monroe, who worked with a lot of astral projection, out-of-body experience stuff, and he contributed the concept of something called a louche factory, where we're being kind of mined or harvested for the emotions that we feel, and that it is very much of a trap kind of a scenario. Not that Robert Monroe wasn't fixated on this, but he did mention it. So anyway, this whole idea that there may be this concept of being somehow chained or trapped is fascinating, and I think that it's really worth taking a look at some of this more closely. First of all, there's something strange about this configuration of the allegory, that there is this business of the chains and the prisoners. And what Howdie was recommending in the video, that I will have a link to it here in this video, you can go check it out, what Howdie said to Christopher Anatra and Sean Bond. Basically, he was saying that we can step outside our current conceptualization of reality. He recommends that we do this after death. He's saying that that's the time to do it. You can prepare up until then, and then when you cross on to the great beyond, you will not be trapped again. That's basically Howdie's suggestion. And the invitation comes from recognizing that we may not be able to escape in this lifetime or leave this foundational reality that we're part of, but there are levels of conscious awareness. You know, that's the thing that I keep coming back to. I don't think Howdie actually says it that way. This is me, Cynthia, bringing up levels of consciousness. To me, it's obvious when you look at the energy meridians in the body. When you look at the energy centers, we've got one at the crown, we have the third eye energy center, we've got the throat, the heart, the solar plexus, the dantian, and the sacral, the root chakra. So those 7 chakras are the fundamental nexus of consciousness that we tend to operate in daily reality with, that we're a layer cake of sorts of all these different ways of seeing and viewing and feeling about the world. And what's so interesting about this is that if you know that there's some sort of a dream going on, that what we're seeing, it's like a waking dream, and that's another way to envision this whole thing, then you can recognize that these layers of consciousness that I'm talking about give us the ability to rise above the previous level of consciousness. We see the same allegory of the levels of consciousness in the levels of our brain. If you look at that, you'll see there's the reptilian brain at the base, and then it kind of builds up. We've got energy centers in the body. Those also enable us to see the world through our heart, through our throat, through our third eye, through the crown. Each of those viewpoints of the world can be quite different. Hopefully, we're an integrated whole within each and every one of us, so that we don't notice that there are 7 different voices, 7 different layers of perception going on. Now, I love the philosopher Gottfried Leibniz, and so when he was writing in New Essays on Human Understanding, that's a book that contains Leibniz's writing, he has, there's a quote in the book, and that book again is New Essays on Human Understanding, and basically the idea is this is proposed by Leibniz, one of the 2 creators of calculus. Conscious perception arises gradually by degrees from perceptions that are too minute to be noticed. So he's really talking about these subconscious observations that would be the root chakra, the 2nd chakra, the 3rd. We're picking this stuff up. We have a sense of time beyond the 5 physical senses that we already know about. We apparently have a sense of magnetism. Humans do. We have all sorts of things going on that are in addition. Animals, including humans, can probably sense things such as earthquakes. I know I often get advance notice of earthquakes, and certainly other animals do as well. Anyway, with awareness of these levels of perception that we currently have, we can envision how the higher levels of consciousness are steadily arising. And that's a natural part of how we always see the world, and how our mind is constantly internally creating a representation of what's out there, with quotes. And when you think of it this way, then I'm going to quote something else that Leibniz said that's brilliant. Now he was just such a genius. And so he's also said, this is quoting from Principles of Nature and Grace. And when Leibniz talked about how do these perceptions arise, he said it's good to make a distinction between perception, which is the internal state of what he called a nomad, representing, monad, representing external things, and then apperception, which is consciousness or conscience, or the reflective cognition of this internal state, which is not given to all souls or at all times to the same soul. So he's really getting into that slippery trail that's so difficult, so elusive, so ephemeral to pin down, this idea of consciousness. And he's showing us how there's both a first order perception of something and then a second order higher level awareness of it. We are that layer cake. We are constantly doing this. And that's the way we think. So basically, he continues to give other wonderful quotes. And I think the idea that I want to delve into next is going back to the idea of the school or the soul trap. And when you look at, if you're just choosing between one or the other there, do we have free will, or is everything are we chained to a wall somehow and there's no way to escape what's going on? I definitely appreciate the reality being a school concept. Thanks to this awareness of reincarnation that so many of us have. Like I certainly have a feeling of consciousness before I was born into this physical reality. A lot of other people do too. I've got that born aware phenomenon that I've referred to, that the author Diane Brandon wrote a book by that name, and I've got a chapter in that book called Whoops, Wrong Planet. So it's that's part of this idea that, yeah, there's reincarnation. Near-death experiencers often talk about that. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that we do have past lives. So if that keeps happening, and we keep learning in each lifetime, that's the way I see it, to rise above temptation, to succumb to what's been called the victim triangle or the drama triangle. This is an idea proposed by a scientist named Karpman, so it's called Karpman's triangle or Karpman's drama triangle. That's Stephen Karpman. Basically, that can feel like a trap when you feel like I'm a victim, like a prisoner chained to a wall. That's that victim role. And so what I see in the school mindset of life being a school, reality being a school, is that it's possible to recognize that you're not a victim. Now that realization requires rising above the entire drama triangle, which includes also a rescuer role, because it's like a merry-go-round triangle with 3 roles, the primary ones: victim, rescuer, and perpetrator. And usually a person is born feeling like a victim, then sometimes they proceed to be quite anxious and worried about other people, and they wish to rescue people and save people. And then often they then, without noticing it usually, move into the perpetrator role, where they are, for everyone's good, enforcing rules and draconian measures on everyone. Now this kind of process is basically a total control drama, and that is what we have the opportunity collectively as human beings to rise above. That total control drama is what I'm calling it, and Stephen Karpman calls it the drama triangle. That is the prison mentality. That's where it looks like there's a soul trap thing going on. So if you rise above that, and rise above that awareness of suffering and so forth, being a cause, the cause of the suffering being outside of ourselves, someone else who we blame, and then we try to save others and so forth. And you can see how this perpetuates itself endlessly, and wars can keep on going endlessly, all because of this drama. And it can start with a family, and it can rise and infest a community. It can take over sort of with this group think into entire civilizations, cultures, and countries. Anyway, going back to life needs again for another restoration of order. Can you see this? I'm just showing something I've shown before in other videos, I think. It is basically the experience of God or the Absolute, and all of these paths of different spiritual traditions, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, natural ways of knowing, indigenous ways of knowing, and so forth. This is what's known as the collective perennial philosophy. And again, Leibniz contributed to this. He had a term for it that he used, which basically was indicating that there is this perennial kind of a wisdom. It's infinite, it's absolute, it's beyond space and time, but it's pre-existing. And so when we are in touch with that through meditation, through prayer, it's possible for us to recognize that there's a divine spark inside of each and every one of us, and that we can absolutely connect with that infinite eternity that is present in the stillness that we can access through that prayer, through that meditation. And so when we get into that sense of these empty voids and who we are, that becomes a little bit more clear in a very powerful way that is more felt than it can ever be put in words. And for those who still feel like they're hearing what I'm saying, or they've heard this before, yeah, you've heard life is a school, yeah, you can rise above the drama if you do the work, usually, to recognize the patterns and so forth. But maybe they're having trouble accessing this beautiful stillness, this absolute love experience that's possible. If people are still feeling trapped or imprisoned and wishing to escape the boundaries, how can you imagine breaking free? And going back to what Howdie was saying from that interview with Sean Bond and Christopher Anatra, basically what he was suggesting is when you're on the threshold of passing on, when you're dying, that you can have someone hopefully there present with you, maybe suggesting something so that you can get into that correct recognition that you do not wish to participate in being a victim anymore, basically, being a prisoner. So that's one way to do it. I'm suggesting do it while you're still alive and recognize that what seems to be a trap is really what I'm calling a total control drama, what Stephen Cartman called the drama triangle. And going back to Leibniz again, he points out, and here he is speaking on the topic of nothingness and what's going on there. And that little picture I just showed you. He says, "It is true that as the empty voids and the dismal wilderness belong to zero, so the Spirit of God and His light belong to the all-powerful One." And this gives us the opportunity to bring in miracle-mindedness, quantum jumping, Mandela effects, reality shifts, all that good stuff. Basically miracles. And that's the kind of intrinsic freedom that I get when I feel my connection to divine source, to God, to Creator, to divine oneness. And this is what Leibniz also discussed when he coined that term philosophia perennis. And that idea is that we can all access that divine source. It's available to all of us, which gives us a higher sense of who we are. And we don't have to have any karma. We don't need any of that shame. We don't need to be going through that. And so we sometimes, the progress we make can feel frustrating because we sometimes feel we've been memory wiped. That's something that I think Howdie talked about in that interview. I watched another interview of his somewhere else, so might have seen it on a different discussion he had, but the memory wiping really bothered Howdie. That means like when you come into this life, you don't remember much about who you are. What I'm suggesting is that when you tune in to this cosmic source, this divine creator energy, it's possible to start reconnecting with that direct knowingness, and it's possible to regain a sense of what's really going on here. Lots of near-death experiencers come back with that wisdom. They know that there's something that they call sometimes the ripple effect, for example. What is the ripple effect? That's where I am reminded, with that experience directly with God, that by being kind to animals and plants and my family and neighbors and people wherever I find them, that there's going to be a ripple effect, that my kindness has the ability to perpetrate and perpetuate and expand and continue on. Whereas if I'm small-minded, petty, or mean, that too could have a very negative ripple effect. So we are the change that we wish to see in the world. We are very, very much so doing that. And when you're in that direct divine conversation with Source, God, Creator, Oneness, the universe, you are getting a direct knowingness of that and a real feeling of it. So to me, this overcomes the memory wiping. And so then you can remember, aha, the whole point was to realize, of course, we're not victims, we're not rescuers, and we're not going to force our will on the world. That's not what this life is about. It's about transcending that and regaining and retaining that true internal sense of that divine spark that we each have. So we can do this also through practicing lucid dreaming, which means you can fall asleep at night with the intention, tonight I will remember my dreams. And you can even explore things like this. You can say, show me tonight, what is the true nature of reality? Is there something more than this idea of, being the soul trap concept? How did Plato gets stuck on that? How is that control drama so gripping and so real to so many people? How is that so compelling? How can I personally transcend that? And how can I help others do the same? So this gets into the whole school idea. And I just love these ideas. I love the idea of the Holy Spirit. I love the idea of the Tao. I love the idea of just knowing that we can, each of us, access that bliss, that divine source, eternal, infinite, beautiful calmness and balance, and where everything is aligned, where there's just such a sense of attunement with all that is. It's totally accessible for each and every one of us, and we can access it through stillness. That's one of my favorites, because when you go into everything just slowing to a stop, nature helps, of course. Things seem to slow down when we're not feeling pushed by other people or by all the pressures of our civilization. So when you're doing that, you can regain a sense of your own levels of conscious agency and the integrity that exists within all those layers of yourself. You can regain a sense of your sovereignty and remember that no matter what happens, you can always rise to a level that's going to be above the level of the so-called problem or drama facing you at any given point. And of course, you can always ask my favorite question, which most of you know by now, which is how good can it get? And these are the main ideas that I wanted to share, but I've also written this out in a blog post with a link from this video that you can connect to and click on if you wish. Sometimes the written word is a little easier to follow, and I give the references and the sources to the things I'm talking about. And one that I didn't even mention is Nicholas Rescher's book, Axiogenesis. But he is amazing. He's a philosopher. The book is a bit technical. It's a good one for people who might be, maybe they're atheists and they're hearing what I'm saying. They're thinking, okay, Cynthia, but I don't have a spiritual path. That's fine. You don't have to. Paths all go that direction. And you can totally read a philosophical book that's all about the same thing from a very logical perspective. Nicholas Rescher is a logical philosopher. He's a process philosopher and he's an optimist. So his book, Axiogenesis, is really taking those ideas that Leibniz first suggested, bringing them all the way current into the year 2023, which this is, and making it obvious how we're clearly living in an optimal reality, which means it's not a soul trap. It's a school. And that's just my point of view from the How Good Can It Get philosophy. So until next time, I hope you join me in asking that question pretty much any time. And don't worry that you may not feel happy when you ask it. That question is meant to be asked if you're feeling down, if you're feeling sad. You can ask, how good can it get, from wherever you are, and see what happens. It's just it's like getting pulled up by your own bootstraps, but sometimes it can feel even better than that. So until next time, thanks so much for watching, and thanks for commenting. If you've got any comments that you'd like to share, I'd love to hear it always. And of course, thanks for liking the video too. So take care. Love you so much. Bye for now.